Ken Harvey.
Well, as you've heard, I work with Choice, the Australian Consumers Association, and for that reason I've branded these slides with Choice because it fits very much our theme of, our theme of good thinking and critical thinking. I want to talk about the problems of Australian therapeutic goods regulation. The latest review, we're up to the 17th review since 2002, trying to suggest improvements. Some current consultation proposals which are out there. In particular, there's a consultation and a question about should the TGA take over the whole complaint process, and we'll discuss that. And I'll end by calling for active scepticism because they are asking for submissions on these proposals, and I think it's a lovely opportunity to give some active scepticism submissions. So, the problems with the TGA regulation. To be marketed in Australia, a therapeutic good, be it a medicine or a device, has got to be registered, listed or included on the Australian Register of Therapeutic Goods by the TGA. The TGA uses a risk-based approach for market assessment so that registered medicines and high-risk devices are thoroughly assessed for quality, safety and efficacy prior to market release. All prescription medicines are OST-R. There's only a handful of complementary medicines that have OST-R and gone through this process. Most complementary medicines are called listed medicines with a subtle OST-L on the label, regarded as low-risk medications, required to meet some quality and safety standards, but they are not assessed to see if they work. And as I say, most complementary medicines fit into that category. But there is no pre-market assessment of complementary medicines. And that lack of pre-market evaluation means, and especially the lack of penalties for breaches of the regulations, encourages unscrupulous sponsors to flood the market with shonky products and unethical claims. And research has shown that the public really doesn't understand the subtleties of that cryptic OST-R or OST-L label on the medication. They believe that it must have been, all of them, must have had some government assessment. And they also don't understand the difference between traditional and scientific assessment, which also the TGA allows traditional claims as well as scientific claims. And so there's currently virtually no incentive for the sponsors of complementary medicines to undertake research, compile dossiers and pay the higher fees requested by the TGA to register a product, which is why there are so few registered complementary products. A much better return on investment comes from spending the money on promotional hype and celebrity endorsement. And let me show you an example.
Hi, I'm Nicole Kidman, eating an apple. When Swiss asked if I'd be their spokesperson, I said, how about you say Swiss ambassador? That way you can just film me prancing around without speaking. Well, I could wear cool boots, hide behind flowers, do whatever that is, and I won't have to parrot any of the dodgy claims you make about your products. Just put that shit in graphics at the end. Yeah.
In our first show, we looked at the way natural medicines are approved by the Therapeutic Goods Administration, TGA.
$49? How do the starving Indians afford this rubbish?
We'd like to make a minor correction, because although we said
The TGA is piss weak. The system is a joke, and they don't enforce the joke of a system.
soon after that aired, the TGA decided to cancel the approval for Swiss Ultiboost appetite suppressants.
So what happens when the TGA actually enforces this joke of a system? Well, here's the worst case scenario as we described it. Sometimes, to avoid the TGA, products just pull themselves off the market, keep the same ingredients, and then relist it with the same ingredients but a different name. And here's the letter that Swiss sent out to their sellers after the TGA decision.
Swiss Hunger Control. This is not a new line of Swiss product, rather a new name for the same product.
So how did Swiss dodge the TGA delisting their product? Remember this.
You can sell your herb or whatever if you say that it's been used somewhere traditionally.
So guess what Swiss did?
New label. Traditionally used in India to help reduce hunger levels.
Wow. So now we've got a new, reformulated, more effective label. But perhaps Swiss are kind of admitting to us that the product doesn't work that well.
The choice of the Australian Olympic team.
So that's what happens when the not completely piss-weak TGA tries to enforce its joke of a system. It's enough to drive you to... Thankfully, these rules that are less effective than Swiss hunger control are under review. Swiss and the industry are pushing back against the changes. They don't mind when something doesn't work. But we tend to agree with the new ambassador for Swiss.
Just because it is doesn't mean it should be.
Yeah, well, rules under review. As I've said, since 2002, there's been 17 reviews of the rules, all of them really making the point that it's crazy having a good system of rules, regulations and therapeutic goods advertising code, but absolutely having no penalties for companies that breach them. And as I say, the industry has successfully pushed back. No conclusions have been reached about any of these. So what do consumers and others and skeptics want? We wanted a regulatory system with teeth, and we still want a regulatory system with teeth. We want mandatory labelling instead of this cryptic Austell. We want a label that this product has not been evaluated by Australian health authorities to see if it works. A better resourced, more timely and effective complaint system, because in fact it's overloaded and overworked and has got no sanctions. And clearly legislation for timely and meaningful sanctions for violations, civil penalties, enforceable undertakings. The Therapeutic Goods Administration has never ever taken a company to court on the grounds that, well, the penalties aren't high enough to justify the effort involved. And clearly increased and better targeting post-marketing surveillance, more transparent reporting of problems and cancellations would also help. So what did we get last year? We got another bloody review, and this was part of the Abbott government sort of initiative of cutting red tape, which, you know, I'm enthusiastic about cutting red tape, but there are some areas where a touch of regulation is useful, and this is one of them. Having said that, this latest review, the 17th review, did make some very good recommendations. And again, before we look at those, it might be just worthwhile looking at what's the data at the moment about the industry. The TGA has upped the number of post-marketing compliance reviews they've done last year, almost more than doubled it. They find that 80% last year of all complementary medicines reviewed had a regulatory violation. That's actually increased. And labelling, advertising and lack of evidence continue to be the major compliance breaches. More products were also found to have safety-related issues. There were 0 in 2014-15, there were 13 last year. So it's an absolutely disastrous record of the industry in terms of compliance breaches. And again, there's a sad reflection of the fact that if there are no penalties, then of course companies will breach the rules. And in terms of complaints, 98% of all complaints are upheld. Now, unfortunately, the number of complaints is falling off. As you'll see, it's a rather unrewarding process to put in complaints. But again, it's most unusual for a complaint system to have such a high record of upheld complaints. And let's give you another video.
Next up, we have Ben, who recently came down with the flu. When his partner came home with Sambucol elderberry cold and flu syrup, Ben was not impressed. And not because Ben's an ungrateful jerk, but because Ben knows a bit about science. He's got a degree in biotechnology and molecular biology. The thing is, the product only has one ingredient listed on the packet, Sambucus nigra black elderberry fruit juice, which sounds a lot more like a Mexican Ribena than something that's clinically shown to cut the duration of the flu by nearly half and to reduce the severity of flu symptoms. And the Therapeutic Goods Administration must agree, because now Sambucol have this big retraction on their website.
We unlawfully made claims of benefit for the product, including those stating that Sambucol is clinically proven and effective for the treatment of flu viruses.
Because the Therapeutic Products Advertising Complaints Resolution Panel found their claims were
Unlawful, misleading, and unverified.
Sambicol told us they were
Required to remove the clinically trialled and cut the duration by half claims for Sambicol for future production runs.
Ooh, sounds like the TGA's really cracked down on him, eh? Sure. If by cracked down you mean that in February 2014, 3 months after they got a complaint, the panel looked at Sambicol's dodgy internet ad, then 4 months later they decided the claims were not supported by the evidence Sambicol provided. So they told Sambicol to withdraw the ad and any representations that Sambicol was clinically proven to cut the duration of flu symptoms by half and to not make those claims in any future ad, and that the panel gave Sambicol 14 days to show they would comply. Kapow! Ish. Because 6 weeks later, Sambicol was dogged in for not complying. So the TGA swiftly investigated for another 4 months, after which Sambicol agreed to comply, so they dropped it. Game over for that complaint. But there was another complaint in July 2014 about Sambicol doing exactly the same thing. Well, you know what they say, fool us twice, but this time the panel took another 7 months until March 2015 to find against Sambicol. Is that really so long? I mean, who's counting anyway? I am. 486 days after the first complaint had been made, the TGA cracked down with a retraction notice that Sambicol has to keep up for 120 days. That's about a quarter of the time they've been looking at these false claims. Well, thank God that's over. Yeah. Except for the fact that all this time, Sambicol's been allowed to sell the product with the dodgy claims because, well...
The TGA is piss weak. After they delisted the product senselessly for breaching their own rules, they still allowed them to sell the rest of the product.
But take your time.
Oh, and another thing. Despite Sambicol's promise that as per the TGA's instructions...
Every third party was contacted and was asked to remove previous representations.
Those very representations were still plastered all over the websites of major retailers like Priceline, Chemist Warehouse, Towers Pharmacy and Pharmacy Direct. Yeah, but don't worry about it. The TGA is currently investigating this with a view to action. So you can expect a result sometime in the next, what did you say, 486 days? Yeah.
And 942 days later, this week, we're still having advertisements in Chemist Warehouse for Sambicol clinically proven for colds and flu. So I think I've made the point that the system is not exactly working well. So in short, we've got the failure of the TGA to bring the industry into check over many years, and that's really resulted in a lot of loss of trust in the TGA as a regulator, especially amongst consumer organisations. It involves ongoing harm for consumers, direct harm from poorly disclosed adverse events from complementary medicines, because although they are lower risk products, they are not without risk. There can and is allergic reactions, for example, to echinacea, and certainly there is interactions with conventional medicine with things like St. John's wort, which interacts with a lot of things. And again, if these are not disclosed, camouflaged, then harm results. And more importantly, and more often, indirect harm from consumers foregoing more evidence-based remedies, often to the detriment of their health, because they're sucked in by misleading and deceptive promotional hype. And a good example of recent complaints has been concern about homeopathic cough and cold preparations, which again make excellent claims, or sound very good claims, but as you know, have no active ingredients, will have no more impact than a placebo effect. And on a child that's got a fever and has got genuine pain from sore throats and earaches, there's good over-the-counter medicines, ibuprofen, paracetamol, and it is really very unreasonable that these products are allowed to make claims without evidence. So, we come to the current, the latest, the 17th review and their recommendations. Will these recommendations help? And so we have a year ago, we had the recommendations from the review, and just in September, we got the government's response. And I should remind you that the Federal Minister for Health, whose picture is here, has got 2 S's in her first name, Susan with 2 S's, and she has proudly said to the Australian, when they asked her, they understood she changed her name from Susan with 1 S to Susan with 2 S's. And she said yes, because numerology theory had told her that if she claimed changed her name with 2 S's, then in fact she would be a more powerful person. And look, she's now the Minister for Health, so clearly numerology theory works. So not only do we have Mr Turnbull as Prime Minister, we also have Susan with 2 S's, Lee as the Health Minister, which may explain some of what I'm about to say. So a number of important recommendations were rejected by the government. Sponsors to include a prominent disclaimer that the products have not been independently assessed, which is what consumer groups have been asking for years, and was recommended, was rejected by the Minister on the grounds that a bit more education was all that was required. Sponsors to publish evidence supporting the claims was made optional on the grounds that we needed to cut red tape and that would be an unfair imposition on the sponsors. The TGA, it was recommended the TGA be given power to refuse listing. At the moment, they have no power. Anyone that types out an online form to put up a new complementary medicine, as long as they tick a box saying that they hold evidence and that the product contains relatively low-risk ingredients, it automatically gets up and they can sell it and make whatever claims they like. And not unreasonably, the reviewers thought this was a bit rich, especially for companies that have got a proven track record of shonky products. For example, there is one particular company with a reputation for fat blaster, fat magnet, horny goatweed for him, horny goatweed for her, leading the complaint panel league table for the most complaints. And surely it would be not unreasonable to refuse listing of the latest complaints. But no, the Minister felt that would be too much red tape and we couldn't do that. The problem, of course, is that, yes, although they can do a post-marketing investigation and although complaints can and will be put in, it can take 12 months or more, or even longer, as you saw, before that has an impact. There was one recommendation accepted that was controversial, and I want to look at that in a moment. Mandatory pre-approval of certain advertisements to cease in favour of self-regulation. Now, the review was very clear that they had to cut red tape, and they thought that sort of cutting pre-approval of advertisements might work as long as there were more important other recommendations accepted, like greater sanctions and an improved complaint process. But certainly that's attracted a lot of dissension, even from some industry groups. Now, the advantages of pre-approval is that yes, there's a lot of advertisements, but the pre-approval officers can turn them around in about 7 days. They find that the majority of advertisements do require changes to make them compliant with the Therapeutic Goods Advertising Code. And indeed, pre-approval is the only defence between a misleading advertisement going on a prime-time television and the unwitting consumer. Because, as I've said, complaints and post-marketing reviews can take a long time to remove bad advertisements. And as for going over to self-regulation, some of the worst offenders are not members of any industry association, so self-regulation is not going to impact on them. And clearly, prevention is better than cure. It's better to keep off bad ads than to wait 12 months and then do something about them. The arguments against pre-approval is that it's historically only been directed at certain media, classically television, radio and print. It hasn't caught up with the internet, where a lot of other advertisements are there. It's also delegated by the Therapeutic Goods Administration to 2 industry associations, Australian Self-Medication Industry and Complementary Medicines Australia, and the decisions are not always consistent. But again, that's something that could be improved. And clearly the delegates doing quick reviews of ads don't have the time to review the evidence for the claims in detail, and thus some pre-approved ads will still get up as upheld complaints. But on the other hand, they do get rid of a lot of rubbish. And if we get rid of that, then again, the concern is that the situation will be much worse. Now, as I said, the government has agreed that the removal of pre-approval is conditional on other consumer protections, and we'll go into those in a moment. But many believe that it would have been much better to extend pre-approval to all advertisements, including the internet. It's not such a huge addition because many of the campaigns are on many media, including the internet, TV, etc. And as for the inconsistencies, put the two organisations together and get them consistent. Prevention, as I say, is better than cure. So, recommendations accepted but need ongoing input on implementation. Free text of information on the Australian Register of Therapeutic Goods to be replaced by a limited list of permitted indications. We'll talk a bit more about that. A new listing pathway where the sponsor can provide evidence acceptable to the TGA, which may support, allow a claim for a greater indication, and improvements, as we said, to the complaint process, post-marketing surveillance, increased penalties. Let's look at the free text issue. The problem we have at the moment is that a sponsor, when they add an entry to the Australian Register of Therapeutic Goods, which was done without any TGA supervision, they also add a public summary, and they can type whatever they like, and they do type whatever they like. For example, Sambicol has got all those same claims that were offensive in the advertisements on the Register of Therapeutic Goods. And the reason that they do that is because Section 22.5 of the Therapeutic Goods Act 1989 does say that thou shalt not make claims in advertisements that are not on the Register of Therapeutic Goods, which simply means to the Register of Therapeutic Goods being or having all these crazy claims put on it. So yes, the concept of eliminating free text on the ARTG is not a bad idea. And the TGA thought, well, let's come up with a list of permitted indications. They haven't updated this list since the last consultation in 2013, but the proposed list had many, many things on it that really lacked evidence and were regarded as absolutely ridiculous. And again, consultations put in those comments that nothing has happened about it. It also includes indications for herbal medicines and traditional medicines, which again, there's lots of concerns about those. So there's meant to be consultation with consumers, sponsors and health professionals about this list. It's clearly absolutely essential. Yes, it's one thing and sensible to cut back the craziness that sponsors can come up with, but it's got to be cut back very substantially, and I'm not sure that that's going to happen. The industry put up a list of 6,000 permitted indications. The TGA has cut it back to 600 at the moment, but as I say, a lot of craziness still there. The next suggestion is a new listing pathway where if the sponsor can provide evidence acceptable to the TGA, then the TGA would review it, and if it was okay, an expanded claim would enable to be made. And again, that's sensible because at the moment there is no reward for innovation. As I say, the companies don't invest in research, and I think to cut back what they can say on any old complementary medicine and encourage them to do research to put up a more specific claim is sensible. Whether they will or not remains to be seen. And last but not least, improvement to the complaint processes, post-marketing surveillance, increased penalties. Well, again, we've been arguing for those for years. At least they have been accepted in principle. In fact, recently the TGA has had a rush of blood to the post-marketing head, really, and are starting to look themselves at the claims being made. Current priorities, you'll see on their website, listed medicines with blood glucose and cholesterol indications, listed medicines with eye health indications, because they've found that there doesn't seem to be any evidence to support those claims, so they're going to look at those. Ironically, some of exactly those claims are still to be found on the TGA list of permitted indications, which we have pointed out to them. There's a sort of inconsistency between, on the one hand, recognising that there's no evidence for some of these claims, and on the other hand, still allowing them on their permitted indication list. But in short, there now is, all this is up for public consultation. There's going to be lots of public consultations. There's a position paper out at the moment on options for handling complaints and therapeutic goods advertising, which closes just before Christmas. And there's a variety of other consultations coming up down the track. So, let's look at some of the proposals. The good things is they have accepted the need for improved sanctions, civil penalties, infringement notices, injunctions, enforceable undertakings, the sort of toolkit that the Australian Competition and Consumer Commission has that can really get stuck into shonky behaviour. And the TGA certainly has accepted, well, they put it up as an option that they would support that. Complaint handling processes. At the moment, there is an independent complaint resolution panel. The TGA suggested they should take it over. It would be more efficient if they did it. Certainly there are problems with the complaint resolution panel. Understaffed, under-resourced. A lot of people do the work in their own time pro bono. And of course, as I said, it has got no enforcement power. But there are some good things about it, which is a mix of stakeholders, public determinations, etc. So should the TGA take over, and they are seeking stakeholder views, the alternative would be some independent statutory authority. And certainly either the TGA or a statutory authority, if provided with adequate resources and appropriate expertise and appropriate power, would simplify the current complex system, should have increased timeliness and consistency, and clearly sanctions and penalties are important, particularly removing bad ads and bad claims quickly. And also we'd like some degree of monitoring the ability to deal with non-compliant ads that are not the subject of a complaint. I mean, at the moment, the complaint panel can only deal with a complaint put in. They may be well aware that there are numerous other sponsors making the same claims, crazy claims, but they can't do anything about it because there's no complaint. Our concern with the TGA taking over, which goes back a bit to some of the criticism in the videos, is that they do exist in isolation. In fact, in kangaroo paddocks out in Symonston in Canberra, they're a long way away from anyone else, and they certainly don't mix with many other people apart from industry. And the current Code Council and Complaint Panel have got a broad representation of stakeholders. The TGA has made bad decisions in isolation. A recent one was that they approved a restricted representation, which is advertising for a serious disease, for a homeopathic preparation, restless legs relief. Now, why on earth they would approve an advertisement for restless legs relief, which is, and restless legs is a well-known medical syndrome, for which there are prescription drugs that can be effective, why they would approve a homeopathic preparation, God only knows, and certainly we've been given no explanation as to why that was done. The other concern is that the TGA really does seem to be too close to industry. They're 100% funded by industry. They have regular consultations with industry, very few consultations with consumers. And again, they've got a record of watering down sanctions. The Complaint Resolution Panel will say a retraction is required. It'll go to the TGA. They'll say, oh, no, we'll negotiate compliance. We'll leave off the sanction. And my own view is that sanctions are absolutely crucial to correct misinformation and also to provide some penalty. The TGA's failed to target sponsors with post-marketing reviews whom a complaint panel has found to be repeatedly breached the code. And as we've said, they haven't addressed long-standing problems that are the subject of numerous upheld complaints for weight loss and sexual enhancement products, and they don't fix up the misinformation on their register of therapeutic goods. Yes, it is put up there by the sponsors, but surely if a complaint is upheld, you would think that the TGA would actually correct the information on the public record, but they do not. And finally, they consistently lack transparency, both in the outcomes of advertisements submitted directly and many of them referred to by the complaint panel. Yesterday we had a session on whack-a-mole in which someone said, well, should we send complaints to the TGA? No, don't send complaints to the TGA. They disappear into the TGA's infamous black hole. They're never heard of again, whereas at least in the complaint panel, you do get a public determination. So, the preferred model is an independent statutory authority, hopefully under the auspices of the ACCC, needs resources, needs to conduct monitoring, needs an advisory council. The battle's ongoing. The TGA said that the current consultations aren't going to address the government's decision, and there's many bad government decisions, only how those decisions might be implemented. But the encouraging thing is legislation is going to be required to implement some of these new pathways, the new listing pathway, the new complaint system, and this will offer the possibility of opening up the government's decisions via parliamentary representation and committees. And meanwhile, we need submissions to the TGA and the government. And that's my final message for you. That the closing date is the 21st of December. I will put these slides and also a draft submission template up on my website, and I would really encourage people just to fire off a few lines to the TGA with a copy to Susan Lee with the 2 S's. Thank you.